Hello all and welcome back to UnchartedX. This is Ben, and today's video is the recording of a conversation I had with Hugh Newman a couple of weeks back. Hugh is an author, he's an explorer, a conference organizer and a tour host. He runs the great Megalithomania.co.uk website as well as the excellent Megalithomania UK YouTube channel. Now, we talked about several topics that I don't often get into but do find just incredibly interesting. And many of these are the subjects of recent research for Hugh, things like the accounts of giants throughout history, the connection between Druidic traditions and stone circles, as well as the origins of various human species across the planet. I very much enjoyed talking with Hugh. I do want to extend a big thank you to him for his time, as well as for the use of some of his footage, which I've added into this video, as well as a fair bit of mine to kind of illustrate a few of the things that we're talking about. And hopefully we'll follow this up and get together soon in the near future, perhaps on one of the swapcasts that I've been doing, so we can review some footage of various sites together. So just a quick channel update. I do have a couple more interviews and swapcasts that I've recorded that I will be releasing this week, including some bonus footage and extra discussion for the channel patrons and channel members. I'm also very nearly done with my next regular mini documentary style video, and that one will get into some of the discoveries that have been made beneath the ground at Saqqara in Egypt. So again, many thanks to Hugh for his time, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. So Hugh Newman from Megalithomania joining me on the podcast today. Hugh, it's great to meet you. I've wanted to chat with you. I've been a fan of your work, and I've wanted to talk with you for a while.
Cool. Well, likewise, I've been catching all your videos, your cool documentaries, and yes, delight to meet at last.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, in fact, it was interesting. I've seen a couple comments, and it's kind of an interesting story how we connected, because I think it was a video that I did on the subterranean chamber of the Great Pyramid. It was just one of the things. I think I put it out while I was still in Egypt recently, and that going down there is always an interesting experience, and you kind of related that you had an interesting experience down there, and I guess we followed up on the thread, and I thought, well, we should sit down and chat and do a podcast, and I guess here we are.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, because you got a really nice video on that. I mean, I've not been able to get any crystal clear footage down there because it's just pitch black. They've got terrible lighting. We've done a few experiments down there with sound, but yeah, I mean, I mentioned this experience if it's appropriate, because there was very odd. I was super sick. I was in Egypt. This was in December 2012. I was with Michael Tellinger. We were running a little tour there with Project Camelot and a few other people. And I got the most ridiculous food poisoning I've ever had. It was just horrific. I thought I was going to die. Couldn't do anything for about 5 days. But we had this private access to the pyramid on, I think, December the 21st or 20th, 2012, which was like the big end of the Mayan calendar and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, I'm not going to miss this, even though I can't walk, I can't do anything. So, and I'd never been in the subterranean chamber, so I made my way down there. It's a real struggle. You know what it's like. Yeah. I got down at the bottom, and I felt immediately, within 10 seconds, I felt a complete healing. Like I wasn't sick. I felt a kind of sense of euphoria, relief, and my illness, which had been debilitating me for nearly a week, disappeared just while I was down there. And I recorded myself saying, explaining what was going on, just to sort of prove it to people. And the whole time I was there, I just had this sense of kind of wellness, which is I thought, whoa, this is bizarre. I couldn't compute what was going on. I thought, well, this is interesting. Maybe it's just sorted me out, and I'm going to go out. I'll be fine. But I climbed back out, got out to the entrance again, and it came back hard, and I was sick again, and I stayed sick for two more weeks, and to this day, I've not worked out exactly what happened. Whether it was, I certainly had that effect. It was a real experience, but how that happened, I don't know. Whether the subterranean chamber is so, you're on top of this huge geometrical energy device, pummeling healing energy down to a specific spot, and I just was in it, or it was something else. Whether you go so deep in the earth, you're away from all the kind of different frequencies on the surface, which may be part of the being sick. I don't know. But yeah, to this day, I've never quite understood that. But it's almost like I had to get sick to actually kind of have that effect. And so it's quite profound, really, especially on that sort of prophetic date.
Indeed, yeah, and profound's the right word for that place. It's something I've not looked into for a while. But I have a memory of, and this may have been decades ago even, of seeing people that had done experiments with pyramid shapes and looking at the plants grow better under the, like I think there's something to that. I can't say it's anything I've looked at recently, but I seem to recall, and I know there's some other interesting things about the perfect desiccation of animals that are in those pyramids. Maybe it's just to do with the atmosphere in Egypt in general, but I think there's something to it. And I mean, talking to Yusuf, and when you go to Egypt, there's a lot of people talk about these things in terms of harmonics and resonance and activation, and the term sort of sound hospital and healing places, because we look at them today, the Orthodox view is very much, well, everything's ceremonial, everything's a temple, everything's a tomb. But when from the Kemet side, that traditional indigenous wisdom version of it, and certainly what Yusuf's father Hakim El Ayawan would talk about was things like, these are sound hospitals. They used some of the resonance that you feel when you're in there, and certainly you can generate standing waves and things like that. He seems to think, I mean, there's tales from a long time ago of those being used for healing, for healing. So maybe that might have had something to it. I don't know, but yeah, I have some sympathy about the being sick in Egypt thing. It's hard to avoid when you travel. It hits you a little bit. And yeah, even on our recent trip, I think everybody had nothing that lasted for weeks, but definitely some people struggled. You have that.
Yeah,
that bacteria gets into you, and
it happens.
Everybody out, all exits, no way.
It does happen. No, but this healing thing with these ancient sites is something that I've kind of been studying it even before this time, but never had an actual kind of direct experience, and that really got me. I mean, I'm very interested in the work of John Burke, and the whole Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, his book we did with Kaj Halberg, and how these ancient sites not only kind of agricultural or fertility generators, they're actual healing and kind of consciousness kind of stimulators, if you like. And so I think that's just a part of this old system. All these sites were built on specific spots on the Earth's surface where there was something interesting or liminal, something that was noted by the builders before they decided to build there. It could be geodetic, it could be something, specific placement on the globe. It could be energetic. They could have seen lights there or something. And so, I think there's a lot more to this when you get into this kind of, energy and healing side of it, because it's often, I mean, I'm quite, technical in my brain. I kind of want to kind of work things out, mathematics and geometry, all this kind of stuff, engineering I'm interested in. But sometimes you need to have a direct experience to kind of realize, this stuff people have been talking about for this long. Yusuf, Hakim, you mentioned, it kind of becomes a reality, and it kind of sinks in. It makes you think again about it.
That's such a good point. It's for anybody that's not been to places like Egypt or even Peru and these these profound places. That was my approach to it. And I've heard guys like Chris Dunn, who's an engineer. I mean, he's written books on technology. He's literally about as technical as they get when it comes to some of these fields. He has a great lecture. It's a YouTube video where he talks about it. And I had this similar experience. I didn't know about this till after I'd the first time I went to Egypt. But the first time I approached it, I was thinking about Egypt and interested in the mysteries, heard from Hancock and things. And I had that analytical approach, but and a lot of people go there thinking that that's, they're engineering, I'm going to study this and try and figure it out. But then when you get there and you actually are in these places, there's a profound experience that comes along with it. And whether that's maybe got to do with the location or something, but it's this emotional reaction you have to it. And I try to describe that to people. It's like when you go to, a lot of people try and look at these very analytically, but you tend to find that there's an emotional component that comes along with it. And Chris Dunn has a great story that he tells along the same lines. It's like he went there thinking he was just going to study it, and then all of a sudden you have this just profound reaction when you're there, and it's all these, I guess, feelings. It's an emotional reaction. It's like left brain, right brain. That all comes together in these places. It's an interesting phenomenon. Anyone who hasn't been there, I mean, that's something that is why people find themselves going back again and again to places like Egypt and these places. Just that it's that feeling that they give you when you're there in a lot of ways.
I mean, when I first saw the Giza pyramids, like, what was it, 12 years ago or something, it's just so, I couldn't cope with it. You know, this is long before I had that experience, but it was just something about seeing these huge precision engineered geometry just built on the land, and they're really abstract. There's a real abstract thing about the Giza pyramids in particular. I get the same feeling at Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey. There's this real abstract, artistic kind of design spec that you see. That's what you see with your eyes, because it's completely sealed up, wasn't it, originally, with perfect, limestone over one of them, granite over the others, and so forth, black and red granite and so forth. So that to me is just. And just even the style, of the stonework around the middle and the smaller pyramid, it's the polygonal style, obviously, but that's really abstract, artistic style as well. It's not. It doesn't look like it's useful. It doesn't look like it's like an architectural design spec. It's like artistic, but completely abstract. And I find that's the profoundness I really got when I went to the Giza Plateau first. It really kind of got me on that level, because it's like, why design them like this? And you can't even see the interior. You're not supposed to see it whatsoever. So you don't even know what's going on inside it if you just arrived there, a couple of thousand years ago. So yes, it's something about these places. It's all these different levels it gets you at.
Indeed, yeah, and there's another aspect which is, to me, it's also which makes these things worth visiting and seeing if people haven't, is it's just so far out of our realm of what we normally see. Even to some extent, classical European history, we have this connection to it, and there's these places that we understand, and ancient Rome. I mean, but you go back far enough to Egypt and the megalithic stuff in South America and Central America, and it's just. It's so far out of our civilization, and it's out. I think again, it comes back to, you talked about consciousness and it's this state of mind. I think that was they had I think those cultures, whoever made them, had a different connection to consciousness and states of mind. It's something that our civilization generally doesn't engage with to a lot of in a lot of ways. Again, I'm a fan of Hancock's work in this direction, like looking at the benefits that can come from altered states of consciousness that perhaps were dealt with initiation, and some of these sites were used in that manner. There was one question I had. So you'd written a book about this, when you talk about like the potential like energy sources and the location of these sites on the planet. That's something that I briefly looked into. It's something I want to get into a little bit more, but the whole potential of like telluric energy and these sites being located in specific areas. And for me, it's like some of these are just emerging areas of science today, and a lot of this stuff, I think it's possible that some of the reasons behind it, and even perhaps some of their functional purpose, if indeed they had one, probably lays in some of those areas that we haven't quite figured out yet. And there's certainly plenty of areas that we don't know about as a species just yet, or at least we haven't rediscovered yet. But yeah, is that I haven't read the book, but I know you did something about that. You think that these places are lined up in significant locations?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, you got like, what the book really was. It's called Earth Grids, and it was like really about all the different theories about like ley lines, earth energies, geodetic locations, the way that many of these sites are placed according to mathematical and geometric principles on the surface around the planet, with Giza really appearing to be the ancient prime meridian, where everything was measured out from, all these different locations of all these other major areas of construction, like, obviously Stonehenge, Peru, Mexico, things like this. Mm-hmm. But Giza is really seems to be the center point of all this. Even Göbekli Tepe has links with Giza, geodetically, which is surprising because that's so old. And Giza is not supposed to be that old, although some people say it is, of course. But I think if you're looking into the energetic aspect, I think there's a very strong case for this. I mean, anyone who's not read John Burke's, he's now passed away, unfortunately, his book, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, that is one of the most important books written on any of the ancient mysteries ever, in my opinion.
Add it to my list.
Because Yeah, he did the tests. He had these magnetometers, electric voltometers, and all these different things. Really expensive, really big equipment. Take it to all these sites, take measurements for days on end, not just one measurement or two. He'd do it for days on end, and he would get the results that all these kind of geomancers or dowsers or alternative thinkers had been expressing for a long time. And it was, even it brought some of the indigenous and native tradition to life, that they were talking about these sites in this kind of energetic spiritual manner, where these strange lights and energy were seen, and actually there's a reality to it. And he found that, and then you mix that up with what you mentioned earlier, the whole study of archaeoacoustics, and suddenly you've got this kind of invisible science re-emerging that people are just only the last decade or a couple of decades have really started to get with these ancient sites. I mean, archaeoacoustics was ignored when that first came out, but now they've done all these tests in places like Malta and the Hypogeum, inside the pyramid, obviously, and even at stone circle sites like Avebury and Stonehenge and smaller sites, they're actually finding there's very strange acoustic effects at these places. And all of these sites also seem to be built on very significant earth energy hotspots, where these telluric currents kind of congregate, they meet, they kind of manipulated by the stones in the ground in the stone circle, for instance. And because these telluric currents only travel about less than 3 feet deep beneath the surface. So if you've got anything that goes below that, i.e. stone going deep in the ground, or you've got a ditch or a henge around a site, the energy would hit that, and it would follow the path of least resistance, and then it would be controlled and manipulated by the builders into specific parts of the site. So you get this build-up of this kind of charge, and this is what it was all about. And they would place their seeds there, they place their grains there, they would get charged up, they would get higher yields, because this was a science to them. It wasn't just a spiritual kind of ceremonial thing. And the same spots, they would also, meditate, and it would affect their consciousness. So it's the same energy they were manipulating for fertility and agriculture was actually affecting altered states of consciousness. And so this is a whole other kind of invisible aspect of these sites. And this applies everywhere. This isn't just in Stonehenge or just in everywhere, right up until recently, when where kind of sites like these sacred sites were being constructed. Even churches, up to in the Middle Ages, they were using very specific geometry and placement, and even orientating it to the solstices and the equinoxes. That was an earlier pagan or megalithic kind of science. And so that as well is another thing, where you're harnessing the cosmic energy with the earth energy, with the telluric currents and all this other stuff. And I think to me, this is one of the most fascinating aspects of these sites, whether it's pyramids, mounds, stone circles, or anything else.
Yeah, me too. And I try to focus a lot on the technology and in the architecture, but it's definitely, this is one area I've been trying to do more research into, because I think it's fundamentally connected with the purpose for these places. I really, after one thing I've learned from looking at these for the last 10 years at least, is that this stuff isn't just ceremonial everywhere. Like, there has to be, I think there is some purpose, there was some function, and it seems, the more you look into it, the more it seems to be related to these. I don't want to. It's like organic technology. Like it's some connection to the earth. It's the ability to use organic materials. That's why these things are made out of stone. Where our civilization went in an entirely different direction. We make these composite materials. We are disconnected from all of these types of concepts. And you can't. I mean, you simply can't deny that these things exist. I mean, you mentioned dowsing and that type of thing. Like, there is very hard evidence that these things work. And then all these sites have connections to water as well. For example, and I think I have to read this book, because it sounds like he's done some of the experimentation that I've also had a little look at. I have a video where, with Yusuf, we were testing sort of the electromagnetic properties of different types of megalithic stone, which is this interesting combination you see in a lot of places in Giza: basalt, limestone, and granite. And they conduct electricity in different ways. And then you see how these things are laid out on these sites, particularly the oldest sites, the biggest sites, the Old Kingdom stuff. They're very specifically laid out. And then there's also some really strange effects in certain places where there seems to have been a heat effect that's been applied to, say, basalt that's been on the inside, it's been cased in limestone, and these basalt blocks are now crumbling, but they haven't been really exposed to the sun for that long, and not like this stuff just crumbles naturally after sitting in the sun for very long. It's almost as if it's been heated up and cooled down a number of times that have caused this effect. So I think there's an awful lot of things we could be doing to investigate in those directions and maybe learn something. Like there's, as you say, I think it's not all just mystery and magic. I mean, magic's just science we haven't figured out yet. Like this is all stuff that I think we can find the answers to if we were open-minded enough to really put our back into it, if you like, and use all of the science that's at our fingertips to go and investigate it. But it's tough. These places are often controlled by authorities that are vested in the orthodox story, and you have to be playing along those lines to be able to get access to these places and do these experiments. But I live in hope that'll change slowly over time. We'll see.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's like, you mentioned Youssef is a good friend of mine as well. We've done many trips with Youssef. We tried to get him over to England once, but couldn't quite manage it. But he's kind of view on things. I mean, he's very into he's got this spiritual upbringing with his father, obviously, but he's also got this very technical engineering element to his way of seeing things, and a musical acoustic aspect as well. But you look at you look at the high level detail, and like Chris Dunn style, where you're seeing precision engineered beyond what is necessary, and accuracy. And he says it's like a machine, it's like a generator, it does something useful. It's not just there to look pretty, it's actually got this other kind of aspect to it. It works as a functioning kind of energy machine. And so many of these sites, especially in Egypt, Peru, and even Stonehenge to some extent, are precision. They're very specifically designed, with very accurate, beyond what is necessary. So you get the effects. So if you're doing acoustics, or you're directing energy, or you're trying to affect consciousness, there has to be a sort of spec that they're working to. And I think this is why you get so much precision detail. And they were so obsessed by that, because they sort of kept fine tuning it. One of the things I keep spotting everywhere, people talk about these like protrusions or nubs on stones. They're like tuning things. To me, that they're part of this tuning aspect of it. They were probably much bigger originally, then they would cut it down until it was tuned correctly. Likewise, you get scoop marks. You get scoop marks in Aswan, you get scoop marks in Peru, Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo, all these other places. You actually get them at Stonehenge. There's two stones there, possibly three, that have got clear scoop marks, like ice cream scoops, like butter, they've been taken. And some of them are huge, some are this big, taken out. I'll send you some images to add here. And they're almost identical. It's like the same technology, but to me, they're tuning it. They're kind of just trying to alter it slightly so it tunes and it hits this resonant frequency. And I recently spotted this on the Tlaloc statue that's outside the Mexico City National Museum, the Anthropology Museum. Around the back of that, it's got this huge, I'll send you stuff on this, but it's got this huge backpack on it. It looks like a backpack, but down one side, just because the light happened to be correct that day when I was there a couple of months ago, you can see scoop marks again. And again, I thought, Christ, that's the same as what we're finding in all these other places. Now we've got it in Mexico as well. And so I think there's a lot of this going on. If you look at Stonehenge as well, you've got like the inner kind of parts of most of the stones are very neatly cut. They're kind of flat in some respects, whereas the outer is rougher. Much rougher. You also get this on the polygonal walls as well. You get this kind of beautiful, kind of puffy polygonal design. You go around the other side of it, and it's like completely rough. They kind of that's roughly tuned, but this side has to be perfect. And often they're hidden, some of these perfections as well, so you don't even see them. But yes, I think there's an element of that when they're actually trying to just alter the resonant frequency for energy, acoustics, and other purposes.
That's a really interesting explanation for those, because I have some friends, Andrew Finnick, who runs the, I think, Ancient History Criticism channel. and there's a really active group on Twitter. They're forever like discovering nubs, and they're trying to understand it. They're casting it in terms of some sort of stone language. But I really like that idea. I think that's the idea that it's being used as a tuning device to sort of affect the fundamental resonance of the structure of the stone. That does make sense to me too. And then you've got this material that you tune it by removing or taking scoops out or changing the size of these nubs. That's an interest, and it is something. It's one of those worldwide phenomena. You see it all over the place, and that kind of would be the next question. Is that we see this in so many different places. What's your explanation for that? Do you think this was like ancient cultures that were just connected to nature and some of these fundamental earth science types of things, or do you think it's the remnants of something that of a global civilization that came before? I mean, where do you see all that fitting in from a ancient civilization perspective?
Yeah. No, that's a big question, that one. Yeah, this is like I'm very much a fan of Graham Hancock. I'm also a fan of John Michel. He was like my mentor, and he wrote several quite brilliant books, including The View Over Atlantis, and they kind of cross over. John and Graham do in many ways. John's now passed, unfortunately, and they said a similar thing, but clearly there was a global civilization in prehistory at some point, going back to the time of Stonehenge, Peru, Egypt, and all this kind of thing. There's no way there wasn't. I mean, there's clear evidence of diffusion across the planet. Yeah. That is going on. Some areas maybe didn't get much of that, but there's also this idea that they were utilizing, when they were mapping the planet in this deep prehistory, they were actually kind of setting up communication beacons at these sites. So how they did that, whether they were just master kind of telepaths or they were actually traveling constantly, which makes sense to me actually. I think there's something else going on with these sites. I think they're not just what we think they are. I think that there's something about them which is being overlooked by everybody so far. I'm not sure what that is, but I think it's something to do with communication, and whether it's part of, whether there's actually they were like antennas, like sending energy and communication to one place to another using the crystal technology. I know this sounds a bit sort of cosmic, far out or whatever, but I think there's something actually to that people that's often overlooked. It sounds a bit woo-woo, but why are they always using big stones? Why are they using crystalline stones? Right. Why do they have these nubs? Why do they have scoop marks? Why are they using the same geometry? Why are they all aligning them astronomically? There's something going on with that, and I'm pretty much convinced. I mean, I'm quite obsessed by this idea of. I've been researching a lot on like Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpents of Central and South America, and this tradition. And I've been looking further and further into that, and there is clearly this connection with the Middle East and with Egypt. Very much so, especially with Mexico, the Olmecs and other cultures, and the same thing in South America as well. And so I think there's a bit of both of all these things going on. I think you're going to develop techniques that work for you, because I think one of the other things that you mentioned earlier, they develop these techniques shamanically. Where they're ingesting psychedelic plant substances and so forth, having revelations and ideas forthcoming, connecting with the ancestors and all this kind of stuff. And so you're going to get inspiration and ideas emerging from that realm. And that's going to happen in different parts of the world. And then when you connect with these people from different cultures, it brings it to a whole other level. I think there's just there was a shamanic consciousness back then that we don't have anymore. We only have it in small pockets, groups. Yeah. So I think that's what's missing, and will probably give us some clearer answers.
I think you're right. And in another book, if people people may have heard me mention this one before too, but I'm not sure if you've read it. But Cosmic Serpent, origin, DNA, and the Origins of Knowledge, the Jeremy Narby book. Yeah, fantastic, because that's few people realize that we have huge chunks of modern medicine and modern pharmaceuticals. I mean, the knowledge and understanding of where these compounds and chemicals came to us from. I mean, pretty much the root of every anesthetic, or most of them certainly, comes from curare, and that's just a crazy story when you look into how they figured out the origins of curare. It's all that it traces back to the Amazonian jungle, the shamanic traditions there, and there's a fantastic book that goes into like looking at at how did you, because you got to imagine there's millions and millions of different trees and compounds and chemicals and all of in the Amazon, like all of this massive biodiversity that's down there, and how they put together the list of ingredients to make curare, and then you've got to combine all these different ingredients. You've got to cook them in a very specific way. The fumes can kill you if you do it wrong, or if you get exposed to them. If you eat it, it does nothing. If you get it in your bloodstream, it does nothing. It only works when it's injected subcutaneously. There's all of these steps that is so improbable. But asking the people down there about how they found this, they took ayahuasca and the gods told them how to do all this stuff. And we, much of modern medicine is directly taken from, the knowledge that's comes from a lot of these Amazonian tribes, and it's that's specifically how they gain this knowledge, how they'll tell you they do it, and it's a incredible book. And like I said, as you said, we don't have this connection to that shamanic traditions, those altered states of consciousness, and a lot of people are rediscovering that now, right? So ayahuasca tourism's booming down there. I haven't had the chance to do that myself. I was booked into Spirit Quest to go down there for a week. I never ended up doing it. I was there to film. I know it's kind of like when I do have the chance, I want to make sure I spend the time to put myself back together afterwards, because I'm aware of all of the I've done a lot of research into it. I'm aware of what it takes, and certainly you can gain similar, I think, benefits with psilocybin and other things. But a lot of people are rediscovering the benefit of these, and it's the pendulum slowly turning around now with clinical trials. Like we're figuring out that psilocybin works wonderfully well with like terminally ill cancer patients. It's I think there's treatments in Germany. There's Rick Straussman and all of his studies with DMT, and then some remarkable results come out of those things. Not just like benefits clinically, but I mean he's pretty much shown that people, they did these trials with DMT under that clinical environment, and people would come out reporting having seen and had the same visions. They'd seen the same figures. They'd had the same experiences separately, which it's hard to explain if you just, it's just a hallucination that your brain's making up. There's something else going on with these things, and it's just a lot of this is a case of being more open-minded. I mean, the whole moratorium on psychedelics has been going on since the 60s. It's a weird case of us overcorrecting, which we do in a lot of places in our civilization. We overcorrect with science. It happened in the age of reason with geology. We overcorrected, swung away from catastrophism. I see this happening in a lot of places, but yeah, I think time and effort, maybe we can, an open-mindedness, I think we can learn a lot of stuff.
I think we just need to spike each of the government facilities with a bit of ayahuasca. I think that'll do the trick.
Yeah, that's another one of Hancock's things that I really agree with. It's like anyone who wants to run for public office must have at least 10 sessions of ayahuasca or something. Just get that grounding connectedness with the rest of the world. You might stop being such a bunch of... Yeah. It's like, how are these the choices for elected officials? Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that missing in our society currently, which is frustrating. But what can you do? I mean, you just got. I mean, with this whole. One of the things you mentioned, these plants in Britain, we had the Druidic tradition, where there's a very high level of understanding plant medicines here. From whether it's psychedelics or for healing or for longevity and things like this. And my colleague and friend Graham Phillips wrote this book called The Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge. He came and spoke at a conference last year about it, and he's convinced that many of these megalithic sites are actually built not just aligned to the solstices and equinoxes and certain turnings of the year for that ceremonial astronomical aspect, but actually to mark times when to go and pick or plant these different plants,
right?
Or when to do things to them and to adjust them and to manipulate them so they grow in a certain way and they produce what you need to produce. And so he thinks there's a lot more of that within some of these sites than people realize. They're actually kind of what he calls them like repositories of living knowledge, where actually certain plants, because of the kind of energetic effect, the fertilizing effect of these sites, plants will grow abundantly in that area, around stone circles and so forth, even within them. And so it could be like gardens, like gardens of different herbs and things like that, and they're aligned. So when certain things happen with the light, the sunrise on a certain day, when to go and deal with that crop and things like this. So there's that side of it as well, relating to these megalithic sites.
That's interesting. Yeah, the whole Druid. I'm super interested in that as well. Again, it's one of those areas I'd like to learn more. There's a great I think it's an old film about, I think it's Ben Brady was the last Irish Druid, or one of the last Druids who was supposedly of that tradition, and it's just an interesting story about how that was almost like it became a secret society within the church ultimately. Like when Christianity came to the, it was something that a tradition that continued, but it was almost run secretly from within the church itself. And a lot of these traditions were maintained, and we've got probably some fragments of that still happening today. Yeah, it's a very interesting story, and you're right. I think there's obviously a connection to it.
Yeah, I mean, the lineage of the Druids didn't die out when the Romans took them out in Anglesey in 61 AD. That didn't happen. I mean, the traditions maintained themselves. There were actual kind of early books that, even though the Druids were technically an oral tradition, where they would have like these phenomenal memory techniques of learning and so forth, that continued actually very quietly in different places. And as you say, that came into like the early kind of Celtic church, some of the first churches in Ireland, Wales, especially in Wales as well, and certain parts of England. And so, but these traditions, Druids, even though they're around 2,000 years ago, thereabouts, their tradition comes from the megalith builders. Even though the megalith builders weren't Druids as such, because it was much earlier, that everything that you find that's been decoded from stone circles were what the Druids were doing as well. But even though they went into more nature religion, more pagan nature kind of religion, but they still utilized these megalithic sites, and that lineage, that secret lineage, continued, and the Druids were the last ones really holding that knowledge. And so there were pockets, though, like you said, this guy in Ireland, I've seen that documentary, and but there are other kind of, in Wales, for instance, there's all these remarkable stories that go on, filled volumes, which again is now a lot of it's being written down, but it's all ignored though. No one's kind of interested in it. It's actually some of this stuff we've actually pulled together and translated for a current book I'm writing with Jim Vieira, which is about the giants of Stonehenge in ancient Britain, where we're kind of looking into the giant lore and linking that with the giant bones that have been found. But in Britain, we did a whole book on America a couple of years ago, but now we're focusing on Britain, and we've got what an amazing kind of chunk of knowledge that's been no one knows about, kind of put in this book. I've been working on that today actually. Cool. And so that brings in a lot of these kind of secret elements, these secret traditions and oral traditions really that only got recorded maybe in the Welsh language, that no one's got around to actually translating. But
that's a tough one.
But we've we found a couple of scholarly books where they've translated a whole bunch of this stuff. And we're like, whoa, that's what's going on. These books that are half in Welsh, half in British. Luckily, this one guy managed to do this about all the giant lore. We've translated some stuff ourselves from these obscure kind of British ancient languages. It's very, very interesting. And then you've got the work of Alan Wilson, who thinks he's translated a whole bunch of these lost Welsh documents as well. And he's found this whole timeline that goes back to around 2000 BC in Britain, of this kind of Druidic kind of knowledge. And like the true history of the origins of Britain as well. So there's a lot more, there's so much of this information which is still hidden now, even though it's kind of available. Right. But there's a lack of interest, really.
Really? Yeah, I feel that. Although I think I do get the sense that there's more people are slowly becoming more interested in. I don't know. There just seems to be in general, a little bit more interest coming into some of these things. And I do want to. You mentioned giants. I'd love to talk some more about that, because that's one thing where it just seems like what's the summary on giants in general, the story? Because is it a different species of humans, do you think, or was it because I sort of go, my perspective on it is this, because you hear about there's so much anecdotal evidence for it, but I'm just on one hand, I'm also like, just we need one bone. I know that there's been a lot of findings, there's a lot of reports of it, and it's just like one bone. Because I figure even if we had, it's the same thing as Bigfoot to some degree. It's to me because if we had one bone or one skull or any one femur, then it would just become part of that fossil record for us. I don't know what the reason, if there's a reason for like the Smithsonian here buying up all that stuff or getting rid of it. And I don't understand. I don't personally don't really understand why, because it's like we know there's Gigantopithecus, we know that there was some large hominids in the past, but it's, you know, and if we found something, it would probably just slot right into this, because we're always finding new subspecies of Homo sapiens and this and that. What do you think was going on, particularly with giants and the connection to ancient cultures?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, that's one of the reasons we kind of got into investigating this, because it was really hard to find solid evidence. That kind of intrigued us, because there's so many of these reports. Yeah. And then, you know, you got in America, you've got all the newspaper reports, you've got thousands of those. You've got the Smith, but the thing is, you've got people like the Smithsonian, and you've got universities, you've got other kind of institutions, and they have records, very clear, concise records of discovering giant skeletons and bones up to 10 feet tall in some cases. And so the fact is, you know, and they measured them and they photographed them. We've got some of the photographs in our previous book. And then the Smithsonian took them all away. And so that's it. You know, there was a kind of, there's two aspects. There's one, you got in the late 1800s. We did a whole chapter called the Smithsonian Files in our previous book, looking at the kind of how the cover-up took place, and it was like an unfortunate sequence of circumstances where there was political, religious, scientific agendas, and plus manifest destiny taking place, where the white man was thought to be superior, so they could take over the Native Americans' land and push them onto reservations. And they kept finding all these stunning artifacts, these 8 or 9 foot skeletons with these powerful kind of ruling elite skeletons and burials, these huge geometric, very sophisticated earthworks, pyramids and mounds, and it didn't fit with their manifest destiny agenda. So they kind of anything that made them look more superior than the current white man who wanted to take over everything, they brushed it under the carpet. But we've got data actually in the Smithsonian annual reports. 2 of them, we've got like 17 accounts written and recorded and excavated by Smithsonian archaeologists, talking about bones between 7 and 9 feet tall. And they had them, and then they took them away. And so then one of the agendas as well is that they would send out people to collect all the Native American bones, especially the skulls, especially large skulls, and bring them back to the Smithsonian. Then they disappear. Then you had NAGPRA that came in, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, that came in 1990. And that was a good thing in a way, because it was, you know, the Native Americans were taking back all the burial skeletons and everything else that had been on display. The problem is all the giants bones and that got taken and put away, and it became illegal to dig up or have bones or skeletons, other such things in your possession to this day. And so we've got tons of photographs, loads of photos of these bones, these skulls with measurement things next to them. So it is a reality. It's not like it's not all made up. Clearly there are some. Yeah, clearly there are some newspaper reports that would exaggerate. We have a similar thing going on in Britain and in different parts of the world, where it just doesn't. I mean, we've actually got photographs in Britain of. I've seen a 7-foot skeleton in Britain that's 2,500 years old. It's on display in a museum in Yorkshire, and so and there's another one on display in London, which we've seen as well, some bones anyway, and. Yeah, so it's just a case, there's very small amounts of physical evidence, but there's enough with the scientific, archaeological, proper measurements in excavations to like make this a reality. But who these were, we can go into more detail if you like. There's different theories on that.
Well, and it sounds like there's good provenance on a lot of these records too, particularly if it's the Smithsonian themselves recording some of it. Yeah, I mean, I can see how that would happen. I mean, to some extent, we have that. It's not the same full-blown manifest destiny that I'm sure was going on in that case, but the whole, the whole Clovis First doctrine is a modern-day example of the same type of thing. It's like we're going to dismiss any evidence that's contrary to this prevailing belief, and almost Egyptology and archaeology
Yeah.
today in general has a touch of that, where it's just like, oh, this is anything. I mean, my good examples go Göbekli Tepe. Like it makes me laugh to this day, the fact that once that came up, they didn't redate civilization. They just changed the definition of what it meant to be hunter-gatherers. Now it's because that was never building megalithic stone circles and these huge, and it's a huge site. People don't realize how big, how much of it's still underground. But they, instead of saying, well, no, okay, because to me, it's pretty obvious this is civilization. You require civilization to build something like this. But instead of changing the date of civilization and pushing it back to go in line with the dates for Göbekli Tepe, it's like, well, no, now we're going to tweak what it meant to be hunter-gatherers. These guys got bored on the weekends, They just wanted to do some stonework with their buddies, get away from the women, put some 10-foot, 10-ton megaliths up. Yeah, it's too easy being a hunter-gatherer. I understand. But and for me, it's with giants and with elongated skulls. Certainly, there's plenty of evidence for that. That's not just cranial deformation. Brian Forrester, I'm going to be talking to him as well. I've talked to him a few times about this, and I've been down there with him and looked at it as well. To me, it's. I think there's our genetic past is way more complicated. I mean, we're like, there's a great video on YouTube from a Exerber. He does this. It's called "Where the Last Humans Left." And it's just, he makes incredible content, but he's pretty much showing you that we're the last humans left. And I think that our real past, and that I think what I just haven't, you can't prove it, but I have an inkling that this megalithic society, the builders, the length of civilization on this planet, probably had a lot to do with other species and other types of humans, and then whether that was elongated skull people, whether it was giants, and whether or not they had other fundamental capabilities that we no longer have. Now, maybe we're the mongrels that came in and wiped them out. Who knows? Like we're certainly aggressive and warlike enough. I mean, just look at the way we've been running the place ever since we've been the dominant species. We've been beating ourselves and each other on the head and everything else for that matter the whole time. I don't know. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe we're just the, we're the ones that knocked them off. I don't know. It's possible, but I think there's a lot of that stuff is tied up in this, and with giants, because I get a lot of people suggest when you look at megaliths and giant things and pyramids, it's like, the giants built this. Something. You can't. I don't think you can simply explain all this stuff just with assuming people were bigger and stronger either. Like, there's a degree of we talked about precision earlier. There's a degree of precision that requires just some sophisticated technology to make. It's not just brute strength and giant people. Like that, you can't explain everything. Just simply with that.
Yeah.
So, but it's I wonder about the lack of it and the lack of like acknowledgement. Maybe hopefully one day there'll be some guy in the Smithsonian that's going to change things, and they'll dig through the archives and they'll pull this stuff out, because it's like we don't have we're away from the manifest destiny thing now. I'd like to think we're slightly more enlightened, perhaps a little bit, than we were. Slightly on the path, let's say, and in some ways. In some ways, we take it way too far too. But, that's the question, because it's not something I've done that much research on. I'd like to do more. That's why I asked. But yeah, is that what you think is going on too? Do you think that's the connection to these megalithic sites? You think that's the giant connection to history?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. I mean, we don't go out all out and say giants built everything. We're not too much, but there's an element of that, I think. I mean, if you look at, when you start looking at the traditions, the folklore, the kind of oral traditions and stuff, everywhere.
Giants.
Everywhere I've been, I found it. Yeah, and even creation myths, the origins of their countries, and other such things, and I think there's something in it. You got to listen to this, because folklore and these oral traditions have reality to them, and I think a lot of scientists are coming around to this. So whether that's enough to prove, to back up the giants case, we don't know. But we try and put everything we can into the book we're working on to look at this, because even Stonehenge, the first name of Stonehenge that's been recorded was called the Giant's Dance. That's what it was always called before the Saxons came and changed it to hanging stones. That's what Stonehenge means, kind of thing. And so you got things like this, but we've found, we've got reports of skeletons 9.5 feet tall, 14.5 feet tall, 7 foot tall, within a few miles of Stonehenge, in the burial mounds that are around the Stonehenge landscape. And so, hang on a sec, what the hell's going on here? So when we found these accounts, we were like, whoa, some of these are 700 years old. We've also got like things like, in Salisbury, the nearest town to Stonehenge, you've got, for the last 700 years, they've been parading an 18-foot giant effigy around their city once or twice a year for 700 years. And one of the names it was later given was St. Christopher. And St. Christopher, if you're looking, I don't know if you know about this, St. Christopher, we do a big analysis on this in the book, was actually a giant, and he was from the Bible lands. He was actually a Canaanite giant from the Bible lands, like a Nephilim or an Anunnaki or whatever you want to call them, but Nephilim is probably the correct. And he carried Jesus across the river, and he became famous. He's in all these churches in Britain. And what's a Canaanite giant doing being paraded around near Stonehenge for 700 years?
Yeah.
To me that's something going on. There's like a connection there that's maintained itself through tradition. But yeah, and you mentioned the different types of humans. I mean, even in Britain, we've got you got the classic kind of modern human, which really came from the Beaker people, they're called, but they were like a very robust, quite tall, taller than average, robust, powerful skulls and jaws and high cheekbones and solid skulls, round skulls. But before them, the Neolithic people before them, they kind of came over in the Bronze Age, the early Neolithic, these so-called European Beaker people. But they were megalith builders. They're the ones who probably did most of Stonehenge and a lot of the stone circles. But before that was the Neolithic people. They did like the long barrows, some of the early stone circles, some of the cairns and other structures, standing stones and so forth. But they were milder, kind of smaller people with slightly longer, thinner skulls. And they've become known. Maria Wheatley's done a book on this about they actually slightly elongated the skull. Some of the royal elite did, but this is a very early culture. This is like very earliest phase of Stonehenge. And so there's two different types just in Britain that we're aware of. But you've got these kind of ones that were even earlier than that. This is the classic Cro-Magnon. These go back to 44,000 years. And there's tons of these have been found along the coasts of southern Britain, in Wales. You've got them all over Europe and France and so forth. And these were up to 7 feet tall. And they were around 40,000 years ago. And so hang on a sec, why isn't this mentioned? Why is this being, if you start looking into the anatomical history books and trace and find the earliest ones you can, often in different languages, Latin and so forth, you've actually got records there that the Cro-Magnon were 7 feet tall. That's how big they were. And they were all over Europe. They were doing this, doing that. Different cultures were moving around, coming in at different areas. And we've found evidence as well. We've got quite a lot, surprising that we've found evidence that there's a route from America to Britain. And so we've got evidence that the Cro-Magnons, we mentioned this in our previous book as well, may have even come from America, and they were there earlier than 44,000 years ago. And there's certain skulls up to 70,000 years old. And we featured that in the last book, and we're following it into this book. And Graham Hancock's done his new book, America Before, and he talks briefly about some of this as well. And there's an earlier book, I forget the name of it exactly, America BC, I think it's called. Jeffrey Goodman. This back came out in the early 80s, and he talks about that. He thinks like America was the origin point of the Cro-Magnons of Europe. He didn't know about Denisovans then, obviously. There's a whole other story. It is. But you got also got Denisovan influences, which are even earlier, mixing with the Cro-Magnons, and so there's a lot of hodgepodge that people just aren't aware of. There's different migrations, there's different movements around the planet, extremely early dates, because you could just get in a boat in America, in North America, and you'd end up in Ireland. That's how you just end up there by not doing much. You just float along, and you get to Ireland eventually. And this has been found to be the case, because you've got all these traditions in Ireland that talk about giants coming from the west and all this kind of stuff, with the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians and so forth. So it's like mixing the kind of trying to gauge take these very strong ancient legends and stories, folklore, traditions, with a pinch of reality, and then look at the modern science. It's starting to match some aspects of that, and so Lisbon's a part of this as well.
Yeah, that's really well said, actually, because that's a direction that I've headed, and some things that I've found too is that there is. The more we get into it, there's like all of this corresponding evidence that's coming from some really modern science that's supporting the things and these grains of truth, as you like, that are contained in these ancient legends and traditions from all around the world. I mean, you mentioned Graham Hancock, his book, the Cerruti Mastodon site's a good example of some form of hominid occupation of the Americas as much as 120,000 years ago. Definitely. In fact, there's been an update about that site recently that is pretty much conclusively shown that yes, this is the result of tool use and hominid, because that was always a bit of a speculation with that, but it's evidence that there was something going on as far back as 120,000 years or 130,000 years in the Americas. And for me, the other big angle on all of this stuff is the cataclysm, the catastrophe, the evidence for some massive issue. And we now know that, of course, the Younger Dryas, there was this catastrophic period that really changed the surface of the Earth, and nowhere more than the Americas, really. Like, that was when that happened 12,900 years ago. I mean, it's raised. This was the event that helped raise the sea levels 400 feet or 100 meters or more than that. And it truly changed the surface of the Earth in the Americas. So any real trace of anything that was going on here would have been wiped away. Same thing that would happen if something similar to the Younger Dryas happened today to this continent. But yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence, and certainly possibility to the fact that something could have been going on in the Americas that may have been the origin for some of this stuff way back in time, and then whatever was here was, I think, in a lot of ways erased when the cataclysm hit. Because, I mean, I've talked to, I don't know how much you've gone into some of the Younger Dryas stuff, or the Carolina Bays is a really interesting topic when it comes to that. I mean, Antonio Zamora's got these incredible slides where you can look at this quite literally saturation bombardment that happened. And I think the Carolina Bays are connected to the Younger Dryas, most likely as the result of an impact onto the Laurentide ice sheet. But, for whole areas of that East Coast, like thousands of miles, was just, you couldn't have been outside and survived this. Like, it may have had a significant hand in the megafaunal extinction, just the shrapnel damage from the ice that was coming in, and all of the things that have now formed the Carolina Bays that were all, again, modern science, LiDAR imagery. We're discovering these massive cataclysmic landscapes that we had really no idea existed until now. We're looking at them through this lens of new technology, and it's like, holy crap, something happened here, and we're able to go back and sort of do some dating on it and things like that. But it's that history of story, the story of history of story. It's not as set in stone as we think it is. I think it's a weird. I don't know what happens in our society. Like, we grow up and we have a desire to be able to know our place. I think as a species, it's like a fundamental tenet of what it means to be a person in our civilization. Like, well, okay, we're smart, we're intelligent, we're ahead of everyone else. We're standing on the shoulders of everyone that went before us. We know what happened in the past. We're confident in that idea. I think it's it's almost like a key component to being a modern human. But I mean, I think the more you dig into this stuff, the more you realize, like, that whole story, it's like, it's on very shaky foundations. Like, there's way more to it, and we really don't have much of an idea about what happened in the distant past, and it's quite likely that there was something way more sophisticated and complicated going on, not than just people banging on, flint tools and the whole Neolithic Stone Age.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and you mentioned the Younger Dryas. I mean, that's pretty much. That's pretty solid now, that whole theory to me. Sure. I mean, I think Hancock kind of championed it and put it out there. He got it out there to a wider audience when he brought Magicians of the Gods out. But this, you go back to you mentioned the megafauna. They're getting extinct. possibly through the Younger Dryas. Well, there's actually Native American tradition that states the same thing, and this goes back to the work of Vine Deloria Jr. He was a mentor. He's like a Native American scholar, activist, and teacher, professor. He died like 12 years ago, but he was the mentor of Ross Hamilton, who became our mentor for our book Giants on Record, and he wrote the foreword. He helped us with the book, and one of the things I was reading through loads of old Vine Deloria's work, and he talks about a time which is possibly the time of the Great Cataclysm, and it was called the Dark Tent. Mm-hmm. That's what it was called. That was the traditional name for it, where the whole sky became dark. It was like being in a dark tent. This was the time, he said, not only did the megafauna get wiped out, but so did the mega-sized humans. Right. There were times before the Dark Tent where men, giants, would herd mammoths like we herd cattle. There were, before the Dark Tent, there was times where they would have to wrestle with giant beavers to kill them, to eat them, things like this. And these were huge beavers. These were like man-sized beavers. Like and you get more stories like this. And so, and he said this all happened at the same time. This is the time when all the animals shrunk over the next couple of thousand years, and it was a relief to everybody. And the surviving giants, I mean, literally this is in the folklore, this is in the Native American stories that potentially are 12, 13,000 years old. They talk about these giants, and like some of them survived and restarted civilization in North America. And it was them, and then humans started to shrink after that. That's when and then the Clovis was sort of starting to happen at that time. But before that, there was these indigenous giants. And this is all like in very early recorded traditional Native American tradition, and it's not made up. A lot of this was put into books like 20 years ago, before the giants thing was a kind of popular thing. So there's elements of that just, if you look at the traditions, they all match up with this as well. With this whole cataclysm. Yeah,
there's no end to it. It's not just Native American. I mean, you find references for that type, and particularly cataclysm as well. It comes from almost even our culture, our religion. It's the Book of Revelations. It's almost like an eyewitness account of this angel sounded the horn and the flaming mountain came out of the sky and hit the rivers and the land. Like there's so many of these. Almost every you can't like poke a stick at any ancient religion and not find a tale, an origin story that talks about cataclysm, fire or flood, and then their ancestors sort of barely living through it and them having to restart civilization again. And it turns out that's what happened. Like there was, whether it was fire or flood, I mean, pretty much you weren't escaping this. And even the Aboriginals in Australia, which would have been probably the least affected anywhere on the planet, but even they have stories of these massive, their Dreamtime traditions talk about all that, all giant floods, and that's a whole other area I'd like to do a bunch more research into, because I think there's connections to cataclysm in that culture as well, and they've been there for 50,000 years at least, sort of witnessing it all. But yeah, there's the other aspect, we talked briefly about it, but your longtime colleague Andrew Collins and his work on the Denisovans or the Denisovans, one thing that's fascinated me about that, and you say they came even earlier than Cro-Magnon, is that there's some evidence that they were able to use tools and forms of technology. That whole Denisovan bracelet that's out there, that's a really interesting find. It's like they've drilled through a jade, or I think it's some form of stone bracelet that's got a hole that's been cut in it. We can still see tool marks on it, and this must date back to what, 60, 70,000 years old. So it's, I think we have a misconception of some of these other precursor humans in some ways. We can't just say that, they were just all cavemen, thumping things on the head with sticks and rocks. I mean, I think it's quite possible that they were just as clever as us and just as able to organize, and I think there's a lot of possibility in that direction. Anyway, it's just, I'm not that much of an expert in it, but you've given me a bunch of good pointers on books that I'm definitely going to go and have to read after this now. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean the Denisovans. I mean, there's something about them which is kind of newish kind of stuff. I mean, they keep digging into the Denisova cave. They've got evidence in Tibet now. They've got other areas, but there's even evidence. I mean, not only with the giants of North America. That's a big thing that we wrote about in our book back in 2015. I think it was now. It's quite a long time ago. And Andrew was doing it at the same time then, and we kind of we used some of his material in that, because we realised the finger bones And I think the two teeth were very large. They were much bigger than they should be for a standard human. So there was an assumption, well, maybe they're giants. And more evidence has come out sort of suggesting that these were very large, very powerful individuals. They weren't just standard-sized Neanderthal-type humans. There was a whole other thing going on with them. You mentioned the technology, but their migration and the fact that they're in like up to 3% or 4% in some places of DNA in North America, the northern regions of North America, suggests there was definitely an influx. And these could be the genes that were the giant genes that kind of spread. Right. And there's even evidence. This is thanks to Andrew. He's dug into all the old academic papers, the really hard to find things, and presented it. And we've used some in our new book. There's even evidence of possible Denisovan or Denisovan DNA finding its way into Europe and Britain, which is very, very tiny amounts, but there is something going on with that. And I think more is going to come out when more tests are done. And whether it seems likely it came from the East, through Russia and Europe and so forth, but there's so much, seems to be a lot of unrecorded migration from the Americas to Europe, especially Britain. You kind of naturally end up in Ireland if you're coming over from North America on a boat. There could be Denisovan DNA coming that way as well. And so, it's still being researched. So we've got to wait really and just see what else they come up with. But I mean, the fact is, it's a whole different type of human. So if the Denisovans are like a different type of human that had never been noticed before a few years ago, then maybe there's others that we're not even sure about, don't even know exist yet.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I mean, there's Homo floresiensis. There's a couple others that have just, it's almost every couple of years it just gets more and more complicated. Speaking about something you mentioned, like the idea that Cro-Magnons and Denisovans and our other brethren hominids, if you like, are much more robust than us. I mean, I've heard it described as like their bones and everything. It's the difference between broom handles or broomsticks and axe handles. Like there's a bigger gap between those guys and us. That's why that whole missing link debate kind of started and has never really been sufficiently resolved, because it's not just one link. There's probably more like 7 or 8 missing links between the old species that we know about and us. And one guy that I've been a fan of, again, he's unfortunately passed as well, but Lloyd Pye had done I liked some of his work on human origins. He does kind of take a Sitchin bent towards it in the end, and the Anunnaki, which I'm not a huge believer in, but I do like his analysis in terms of looking at Australopithecines, and there's some, and he also presents really strong evidence for things like a modern case of Bigfoot, or some potentially still living descendant that's come down that line that has these strong connections in the footprint evidence and all these other things that suggest an evolutionary path that may or may not still be living today. And kind of our role in all of that is still a little bit questionable. Like our connection to all of that's still a little bit questionable, I think. I mean, we're as humans, we're definitely creatures of this planet. Our mitochondrial DNA, it's the same tree of life. Like we're from this place, but there's some interesting. So I think there's some interesting work to be done on the DNA side of this, and I know guys like Brian Forrest has been trying to get DNA results looked at for his elongated skulls, and they found some unknown elements to that. So yeah, again, it all points towards this more complicated version of the past, that there may have been a lot more going on than the typical thing that we just expect.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, one of the things in North America which gets me, it's not just the Denisovans and the different types of human that could go back into a very early epoch, but what we're quite closely looking at the actual kind of accounts of, like, if you're talking about giants, these giants. I mean, some of the skeletons, the way they're described by anatomists and other such things when they were discovered, were extremely kind of like powerful, kind of almost bodybuilder, superb kind of posture skeletons with like almost royal, regal look about them. And the thing is, there's like almost like an elite were breeding between themselves in the North American traditions, the Native American traditions, most certainly. So they maintained this kind of DNA lineage of this kind of royal elite class, and these became the giants, or these may have even been descended from the people who survived the cataclysm, the final remaining giants who survived after the megafauna extinction and so forth. And somehow, right up until the early 1900s, these people were still in existence. They were witnessed by some of the American presidents. They were documented by various writers and artists and photographers and so forth, the Osage Indians, for instance. And some of them, they actually sometimes even had their own villages separate from the commoners, and they were 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall, and that's the way it was then. And this was like, you look into this is Ross Hamilton and Vine Deloria both wrote a lot about this. And Vine Deloria was a very serious academic. He wasn't like making stuff up about giants to sell books. He was like genuine, this is what is being told to me by these elders who have since passed away. These are the stories of their people. And so the fact that you have eyewitness accounts of all the Spanish explorers, not just in North America, but also in Mexico, Peru, Colombia, other places, they were witnessing live giants and battling with them. This is the crazy kind of things. And so this lineage, these different types of humans were around till recently, and these were slightly different. Like you say, we're like the mongrels have taken over, the world. The final kind of royal elite got taken out by smallpox and incoming Europeans.
The rest of it. Yeah. Well, no, it makes sense. I think it's. I look forward to reading the book when you get it out. And I'll have to look up the other book. Again, it's a topic that I wanted to get into more. I wanted to ask you about that connection to kind of the builder cultures and where it goes. But it certainly seems evident to me that it's way more complex. One thing I wanted to pivot to is just ask, because I know you're in Mexico at the moment. You've been here for a while. With the current world situation, I imagine Mexico's a good place to be relative to England in the winter. Yeah.
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet. But I know you also live pretty close to Stonehenge, and I've been a fan of your videos of Stonehenge. In fact, you've got a bunch of them up in the Megalithomania channel. If people haven't seen it, go and subscribe to it. There's a ton of awesome content on there. I kind of wanted to ask you, I've read a bunch of Stonehenge is an interesting place. One thing I wanted to ask you about, what's the modern experience like at Stonehenge? Like, what's it like to go and visit that place? And what's the best way to do it? Is there, because I've heard a couple different opinions on this, and I've certainly heard that they've changed things and that there's sort of gone for the worse, and it's maybe something we can get into, because I've seen similar trends in places like Bolivia and Egypt, where this is, the time to go is always now and as soon as you can, because they keep making it more restrictive. But what's it like these days?
Yeah, it's fine. What you can do with Stonehenge, which, a lot of people don't realize, currently you can actually walk up right behind Stonehenge and stand at the heel stone, which is the kind of outlier stone. And you can see it from there free. It's like free. You can't go in the stones, but you can see it. And so if you pay to go in, which is like 20 or 30 pounds nowadays, you have to go all the way to this visitor centre, get a bus to the site, and then you're controlled where you can walk. You can't walk in the stones anyway, and you're paying all this money. So you can virtually get as close for free just by standing behind the fence, which is private, which is common land. It's like owned by the National Trust. I walk up there most days when I'm at home, because it's like a 15-minute walk. And you can actually see it from the road as you drive by as well. But going into the visitor centre, paying for a ticket, doing all that. There's some really cool stuff. They've got a museum there. They've got like a cafe. It's a huge money-making operation for English heritage. It's their biggest income of all the properties they own in Britain, and they milk it big time. It's quite disturbing that you've got this stone circle sitting out in this field on this wide open space, and they've managed to get a fence around it and control it, which doesn't make sense to me. And there's actually an old decree that was written by the guy who once owned the land. This was over 100 years ago, 150 years ago, I think. And he said that he sold it on the condition, this is to English heritage, that they were called something else back then, that anyone could go and visit Stonehenge for less than the equivalent of like 10 pence or like 15 cents of a dollar. And that's it. So English heritage people have bought that with them, this decree. He said, hang on a sec, I can pay you this much and go in. And their excuse is inflation. So now it's £30 or £28 to go. But there's actually a common law thing where you can just walk into the stones, jump over the fence, walk into the stones, and they can't do anything about it.
Okay.
Because it's and if security try and touch you, they're not allowed to. They can get done for assault. So there's ways to get in if you're really cheeky. But the other way to do it is what we often do is wait for the solstices and the equinoxes where they let people in for free in the morning. Often it can get really busy. It's obviously not happened all last year. The other thing is what we do, we do, you know, my Megalithomania kind of conference and tours and stuff, we run little private visits. You can book out the whole of Stonehenge. It's like 60, 70 quid a person. You can go in just your little group in the mornings or the evenings. So we do that quite often. If you were going to come over, we'd sort that out, because you want to do it that way. If you're a serious kind of, you know, researcher and you want to experience it and see all the little bits, all the scoop marks and other things that no one else will show you, I'll show you where they are. There's like this, that, here, there's that. You can see all the alignments from within, you know, and you can go right inside it, get right up close and experience it that way. I mean, that's the best way, but that's by far the most expensive way. Sure. The other thing is get a jetpack and just land in the middle of it when, you know, no one's looking, you know.
Yeah, well, that day's coming, I'm sure. But yeah, it's one place I've not been. You know, it's one of those places on my list of the UK. I've not been there. I know there's a tremendous amount of stuff to see over there, and it's just not, you know, it's not somewhere. And I really would like to go there. Actually, I've often thought that this is a little crazy, but I've often thought that it would be hilarious, good fun to just spend a few weeks in, like, if you could do it in the summer, go chase around the crop circles and things like that, because I imagine that's quite an industry when that happens. And just, I don't know.
God.
I mean, it's like an internet rabbit hole for me, like that whole, all of that sort of thing. It seems like it would be a good time chasing that. Yeah, right. Yeah. It just.
I mean, I do that.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I get excited by this. The crop circles are actually what got me into all this stuff. I got to admit that I was living in the eastern side of the country, in East Anglia, in Cambridge, and I kept hearing about it. I was into, like, when I was young, I was really into the paranormal and UFOs, esoteric kind of stuff when I was like a teenager and all this kind of thing. And it was the crop circles that drew me into the megalithic landscape and made me realize, wow, actually all the megalithic sites are equally impressive as the crop circles. I mean, obviously a lot of crop circles are being exposed as man-made and all this kind of stuff. But even with those, you know, I got to admit, I mean, I go every summer, I'm out all the time going to crop circles, filming them, getting my drone out, doing all that. I love it. It's just a kind of summer project, but I've been going and visiting them for 20 years, and like I've looked into this really quite deeply, and there's a prehistory of crop circles that go back hundreds of years,
I've heard the same
even
thing.
Thousands of years. Yeah, and so there's the whole phenomenon now, which is a lot of hoaxing and land artists creating them. There's a reality to it that is based upon a genuine, very strange phenomena, which is actually being found all over the world. It's not just in Britain. You have traditions in other countries that talk about these fairy rings in Ireland. You have in the 1950s and 60s, you had a whole bunch of them in Australia. Mm-hmm. You get stuff. You get ice circles in some countries. You have remote fields in the middle of nowhere. People see this swirling kind of energy, and next thing you know, there's a crop circle there, like in remote, like the middle of Illinois or somewhere like this in North America. And so there's a genuine phenomenon to it. And the weird thing is, in Britain especially, they always occur in the megalithic sites. They're always in the vicinity. They're always like, if you check all the alignments between stone circles, often they're on the lines between them, and all this, like, what the hell? So there's a real unusual mystery to that originally was a real mystery. Now it's been taken over by, I know people who make them, for God's sake, you know, I know who they are, you know, and so it's a bit frustrating, but yeah, that's a funny, very interesting phenomenon.
Well, it is, yeah, and I thought it was all, you know, before I started looking into it, I thought it was just all, you know, just hoaxing and stuff. But turns out you're right. There is a real history of them, and some of them in particular are very hard to explain. There's you in fact you can't. And yeah, it seems to be based on there's something else going on there. I just think it'd be fun to do exactly what you say you're doing, which is run around in a summer project and document. I think that'd just be a great time. yeah, it's definitely, I'd put that on the card. I'd love to get over there and do something like that. At least, yes, see something like Stonehenge with you. That'd be awesome. But yeah, there's one other. I mean, you see, I was going to say that when you talk about like the whole experience of visiting these places, it's something I've noticed too, just anecdotally for people, is that even on the last trip to Egypt, they're sort of tightening the screws on what you can and can't do. I mean, it's understandable in one degree because you've had the right before. Let's just forget about 2020, but the rise in tourism on a lot of these places, and I guess they're looking to preserve and protect, which is important. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of these things, they belong to everyone. Like you should have a decent amount of access to it. But you know, I've seen over the years places like Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, you're slowly adding ropes and directions, and Machu Picchu it used to be a free-for-all. Now it's a directional thing. You have to go a certain way through them, and even now the pyramid's roped off. So this was new to me this year. The Great Pyramid they've put up a rope around it. You can't. The guards yell at you. Of course, you're with Yusuf, fine. You can hop over the rope, do what you want. But if you're there on your own, then you get yelled at for crossing the rope. You can't get right up close to it. It's the rope's a meter away from the first sort of the first of the courses. So that's It's just I don't like that trend. It's a bit unfortunate. But as always, I'd say the time to visit these things is now before they shut them all down and you have to look at it behind glass or something, which I think ultimately may be the way these things go. But I mean, it's just changes. I did hear something about the laws in England, whether or not is there some proposal to change those rambling laws? Like I know that's always been the ability for people to walk on places. I know it's public land. There's the public land near Stonehenge probably isn't affected by it, but I did hear something about there's some proposal to change those laws in England, so that you can't do things like that anymore. That would be awful if that happened, I think.
I mean, they're doing things like that already. I mean, there's these around Stonehenge. You have this behind Stonehenge. You have this big strip of kind of common land. It's like a road, really, an old road. It's no longer used really as a road, but you get all the travellers and kind of hippies all parking on there in their camper vans, and they're fine normally, but. And it's common land, so they're allowed to do it. They have rights to park there, but they keep bringing all these laws in and excuses by the local government to remove them and lock it all up and build all these gates. And now because of COVID, now because they're trying to protect, they claim they're trying to protect the land. They want the grass to grow properly and stuff like that, so you can't walk on it. So there's all these little restrictions keep popping up. Yeah, for sure. And now they're trying to build this tunnel under Stonehenge. Under the Stonehenge landscape, and actually goes directly under my house, incidentally, and so I'm not having that basically. So that's gonna become like a pristine landscape, but it's gonna stop anyone being able to see the stones by just walking to them, or driving by them. Which is like the brilliant thing that when you're driving down to the West Country, this is the main road going through. Yeah. You can just see it, and like everyone slows down, so this traffic's really slow and really gentle. 2-lane traffic, one either way, and it's actually great. It's brilliant. Everyone slows down, appreciates it, has a look at it, gets the photograph, moves on, and everyone, no, we can't have a slow road in England. It's like, no, actually you can, because it works and it's perfect, and people can park up, they can walk behind the stones without paying. See it, So as it is, it's perfect in my opinion. They can't restrict because it's public land, some of it. National trusts allow ramblers and other such things, but during the solstices and equinoxes, they're now tightening up, stopping people parking anywhere near, so they have to walk miles to get to it. People come and park in my car park now. They're like 10 cars piled in there. That's the way it works. But the same thing. I mean, being in Mexico, I've noticed it here as well. But this is mainly because of COVID. They're stopping people climbing certain pyramids. There's some you can climb. Other such things. They roped off parts of Teotihuacan. You can't climb the Sun Pyramid at the moment, things like that. I managed to turn up at Teotihuacan a couple of months ago when no one was there. It was spooky. There was like 20 people in the whole place or something. And I went to the Quetzalcoatl Pyramid. There were no guards there. So I went around the back and I looked all around. And my latest video I just published is just looking at all these megalithic blocks that came off the back of the sides of the pyramid. Plus I found another tunnel entrance which hasn't been reported. So they've dug it out, put a gate on it, but it's not in the official documentation on the tunnels that are found around the front, which I've not been able to get in. I've been trying to get in there for years. And we just wandered in and had a look around. But so one of the things, if you want to get to see the sites properly, it's great doing the tours. I run tours. I love taking people to these places and showing them things they're not going to notice otherwise. But if you've got a chance, do little solo missions. You just wait around till no one's around. You can go get in and do all the little things that groups can't do. And so I'm utilizing those kind of cheeky kind of access skills to kind of get into place. But no harm is done. I'm a genuine researcher. I want to see what's going. I want to document it. I want to see what's there. I want to get JJ works on the symbolism to see if there's any interesting things that haven't been published. Indeed. And I think you've got to get to me, I'm an avid traveler. I'm obsessed by traveling. So I'm devastated by this COVID thing because that's stopping it all for everybody. I mean, we were lucky to get to Mexico. I'm grateful we made it here. We're pretty much stuck here for a while, and it's just the way it is, unfortunately. But hopefully by the end, middle of this year or later this year, things will be back on track.
Yeah, I hope so too, because I used to do a lot more traveling than I have been doing recently. Same thing. That was in fact, it was what got me into this, trying to do this, quitting my job in IT to try and pursue this researching full time, because I was spending more and more time looking at these places and becoming more and more interested in them, and and same thing. I've had the same experience. The group travel is great, and we had a great trip to Egypt. We were just there, I think, was it November, December? Mostly December. We were pretty much the only tour group in Egypt, according to the tourist police general. So we had a lot of these sites to ourselves, which was kind of a unique experience. But so I've also had that experience, like doing the solo missions and just going with a guide or with Yusuf, and you get into a lot more places. There's a lot of places that are like that I think it's you can get into that perhaps the group can't. I'm certainly interested in those types of things. Had a couple of good experiences like that type of thing at Saqqara. Like you get down into the catacombs underneath there, and there's rooms full of human bones and some interesting stuff that is kind of off the beaten track. Same thing. Like it's not just to document it, not trying to do any harm to it. I have the same feeling. But at the moment I'm trying to figure it out as well. Like I'd like to get back down to Peru and Bolivia, but it's all a bit uncertain at the moment with what's going to happen. And I sympathize with you guys. I mean, it's probably good to be in Mexico, but I don't know, like guys like Brian, I think Brian Forrester was in Egypt when it went down in March in 2020. It took him 5 months or 6 months to get back home. It's like, holy crap, that's a rough story. In fact, that's what I wanted to say too. Don't know if you heard the story about this one poor Japanese tourist that was stuck in Aguas Calientes when it all went down, with Aguas Calientes being the small town at the base of Machu Picchu. And he was there for like 3 months, and it's just like, if you've ever been there, it's like, that'd be okay. Aguas Calientes is a fun little town, but everything's shut. There's all the pubs and the clubs and all the fun stuff that's there, probably all shut. This poor guy's just probably bunkered with some family, but they apparently took so much pity on him. They petitioned the government, and they opened, he got like a couple days at Machu Picchu on his own. Like it must have been, maybe made it worth it for 3 months of being stuck in this small town in the Andes. But he had a couple of days up at Machu Picchu on his own, like, sort of walking through the place. But that poor guy, man, that's the world's lost its mind.
Yeah. I mean, we when COVID kicked off in March, I was in Malta, and we were just about to start a tour. We were literally the day of the tour beginning, or 2 days before, they announced Malta is not allowing visitors in. So all our people were about to arrive that day. And so, and I was aware of Brian. I knew he was out in Egypt. He's supposed to go to Israel as well. That never happened. And so, but I was there, and it was just, oh my God, this is happening as we speak. There was no cases in Malta when we arrived. And then the day before the tour started, 2 days before, there was like 3 or 4 cases, and they started closing down the country. And I'm like, oh, really? So we've had to postpone it once. We've had to postpone it twice now, so it might be in 2022. So and all our other events, our conference got postponed. It's super frustrating. I mean, Zoom's great to do conferences with. I'm doing stuff with Ancient Origins website, and stuff like this. But man, it's like, you know, these like-minded people, we've got to like hang out and explore and share ideas and stuff. And I think it's really kind of a struggle for some people who are kind of people, you know, want to be out there meeting people. So
no, I bet. Yeah. And in fact, well, then that's another Malta. I had plans to get there. I have a good friend who lives in Malta. I've had plans to get there too. It's affected me too. I had, you know, I had been spent a couple of years planning and trying to grow the whole thing I'm doing, and then it was just like my plan for this, like last year and this year, was to do much more travel and research and stuff too. But yeah, it's sort of put a pin in that as well. Although I'm trying to see what we can do. I got to say, it was really refreshing to have the group of people that we had in Egypt, just because it is possible. You take the tests and you go there, and it takes a certain type of mindset too for some people that are willing to go through all the hoops and the things you have to jump through to travel. So we had a really good group in Egypt of people that were just knew it was an adventure. And we had some hiccups, you know, the cruise got cancelled because we had it booked. It was all the cruises in Egypt were cancelled, the Niles cruises, and then they were on again, and we had a ship and we were ready to go, and then like 2 days before the damn cruise was supposed to start, they pulled the permits for everyone. We're like, shit, so we had to adjust on the fly. But people, you know, they all realize that's just the risk of trying to travel in 2020. But yeah, hopefully this year, like you say, 6 months or so, maybe it'll start to open up again. I'd like to think so, because there's a lot of those places I'd like to visit and get back.
No, for sure. Well, hopefully, yeah. Let's just cross fingers, hope that all works out. But I think there's but there are sort of good sides to this. Like in Britain, for instance, we had the lockdown. You know, it began in like March or April, and it was actually strangely kind of good. You know, in a weird way, like all the sites had a break. You know, everyone had a break, and it was actually really good weather, which is unusual in Britain, for almost the whole time. It was like an early summer, so everyone was actually, we're just having a break, a holiday. All the sites, suddenly all the grass grew back, wildlife came back into some of the kind of more larger archaeological sites. It gave a chance for everything to kind of reset itself, and actually it had this positive effect, not just on, you know, the sites, the megalithic sites, ancient sites that people were going to visit, but the wildlife kind of emerged. The grass grew back in places it hadn't done for ages. There was less pollution. You know, weren't cars. I mean, we sit in our garden at Stonehenge. We've got this major road going by, and there were times, for the first time ever, when no cars would go by for an hour. You know, and it was the most strange thing. And this is the main thoroughfare between East and West England, and so it's got its positives. I mean, but you know, and I think, you know, it's given a chance, a little breather for people in some respects. But now it's winter, and they're doing it in Britain. That's rough. You know, that's rough. Doing it when it's sunny. Yeah, in the winter, man. God.
Yes. Yeah, I know what you mean. In fact, and I talked with Matt from Ancient Architects quite a bit, and he's been, you know, pretty much in one of the strictest quarantine areas, I think, in the UK, and he's certainly suffering from it at the moment. It keeps going on for him. It's unfortunate. And I mean, Australia. I mean, all I can say is thank God I'm not living there, because you couldn't get. Not that I could go home if I wanted to at this point, you know, but you couldn't really get in or out of the place forever. They just locked down the whole country, Australia, New Zealand, and even if you could manage to travel, it's a 2-week quarantine when you come back. It's like it's certainly a change to the way it's been. So I'm just doing my best to try and get around it a little bit. I guess you can travel. It depends where you are, but there's possibilities, and hopefully in the next 6 months, like we said, things will open up a little more. But yeah, cool. All right. So I don't know. Maybe we can. I was just going to say this has been really good. where can people find you? What's the best way if people want to learn some more? What's the best way they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, I mean, I've got. I'm on social media. Either there's Megalithomania and there's Hugh Newman. They can find me on Facebook, Instagram. I've got groups, pages, all this kind of stuff. YouTube is Megalithomania UK. We've got fairly large YouTube channel, got like 800 videos up. It's got. I mean, I'm doing a lot of YouTube at the moment because there's not much else to do, and I'm doing a lot of because we're in Mexico. I'm actually like creating videos on as we travel to places. So if people want to see what is going on in Mexico at the moment, we found some really interesting things in various places, which to me are really fascinating, because it's like showing this megalithic side of Mexico that people don't realize is at the foundation of a lot of these sites. Obviously, we have the Olmecs, we have obviously Teotihuacan and places like that are quite megalithic, and you've got places south of Mexico City which are actually Olmec sites, which people don't realize is actually Olmec sites, like Chalcatzingo, and there's a couple of other places down in Guerrero and Morelos. I've been exploring there with Marco Vergato. He's a fascinating researcher based in Mexico City. He's done some brilliant articles and explorations. He's got a book coming out next year. So I've been doing a few sites with him. There's a place called Chimalacatlan, which no one goes to. It's really hard to find, but it's got megalithic platforms, completely different to Mayan and Aztec and any other stuff. There's a site called Tecotzingo, just outside Mexico City. That's got Peru-style precision steps carved out of solid rock and bowls, and like almost like Chicana crosses, and like no one knows about this. I've got a video coming out on that next week, with some good aerial footage. And so so we're doing a lot of this on our YouTube channel. We just encourage people. I mean, I think in this current climate, we encourage people to watch our videos, because it provides a sort of certain income, a very low income, but it's actually like helps us a lot. Plus, it's like armchair traveling as well, and so people get a chance to see stuff, that they're not going to be able to go to see at the moment. But we've been, so mainly it's YouTube channel. They can catch me on social media. The website is megalithomania.co.uk. That's our kind of website for our conference and our tours. We have a few updates on there, but we mainly have that as our kind of foundation of what we are, what we do. People can kind of catch me on social media, YouTube and stuff. So I'm out there. They can find me.
Excellent. Yeah, and in fact, I love this style of videos. Again, another recommendation for me to go and subscribe and check out the YouTube channel, because I've been a fan of it and subscribed to it forever. I watch a lot of your content. It's yours and JJ's. In fact, Megalithic Maiden, I think it is, for her on YouTube as well. She produces great videos as well. I was going to say too, is if you're interested, I know we discussed this, but I'd love to get you in on one of the swapcasts we've been doing this thing with the Brothers of the Serpent recently, where we've been because I'm sure you're in the same situation with I have so much raw footage from all these places that I've been to, and it's impossible to get it all into a video. So we've been sitting down and doing these kind of long format looks at a certain place or here and there, and sit there and just discuss it and talk about it. And if you're interested, I'd love to get you in on one of those, because I'm sure you've seen tons of things in Egypt. We're not just restricting. It's not just Egypt either. It's South America. I've actually got a lot of footage from the Yucatan region in that area, and in fact, I'd love to talk to you about that at some point too, because that's for me. There's question marks about megalithic foundations of a lot of that stuff, and I haven't got enough experience down there, and I haven't seen enough yet to really understand it. And I imagine you've seen a whole bunch more of it, and you've probably spent a lot more time on those sites than I have. So one of these days, if you're interested, I'd love to get you on one of those shows.
No, for sure. I mean, the Swapcast sounds great. I mean, with Mexico, like I said, it's I've been coming here since like 2003. I've spent a total of probably over a year here of my life. Wow. This might get a bit longer, by the looks of it. It might continue. But and you know, me and JJ are obsessed by the Olmecs. That's the main Mexico thing. We're obsessed by the Olmec. We've been at all the Olmec sites. We've met locals. We've been taken to sites that no one's been to on private land. We've seen artifacts no one's seen. We've got all this kind of footage. We're obsessive. We're writing a book. We're starting a book about it as soon as I got this Giants one done. And but yeah, even in the Yucatan, we're finding megalithic origins, foundations, and dates that go much further back than people realize. Even down in Campeche, down at places like Calakmul and Becan, we're finding similar things. And we're finding Olmec influences in places they shouldn't be as well. And so this is something, you know, over the next January on our YouTube channel was Mexico month, and I think February is going to be Mayan month. We're going to look at Mayan sites because there's a whole thing going on here that it's much older, it's much more mysterious, and it's not just all about Chichen Itza and Tulum. There's a whole other thing. These different groups of Mayans, they were completely different. You know, they're different styles, Olmec influences, even evidence of influences coming over from, you know, different countries. It's clearly here, and JJ's been spotting that because she's an expert on the symbolism. So that's where we're focused now. That's what we're going to be doing a lot on YouTube, and pushing that out there because Mexico is like my second home pretty much. I love it here.
Yeah, awesome. I'll bet. Well, this has been great. Thanks very much.